Hey guys, this is Ash, and you're watching WriterGAsh. So I finally read Queen of Air and Darkness, and it was so good. I love this book, and I've just been putting off reading it for so long. I read A Lot of Shadows when it came out, and I thought I would read Queen of Air and Darkness when it did too. I got the book immediately, and I've had it sitting on my shelf for a year and a half now. I just never had the guts to actually read it because Lord of Shadows was so good that it broke me. It was so good. It's probably one of the most powerful books I've ever read. It was fantastic. And I do have a book talk for it, and I'll link it up there. And then it's also in my description box below. It was such a good book that when I got this book, I was one, scared of being disappointed, and two, scared of dealing with the things that happened in Lord of Shadows. But this also serves as a warning if you haven't read either of the books. If you haven't read Queen of Air and Darkness, be warned from here on out there will be spoilers because this is a book doc. So let's start off with Livy's death. That was the worst part of Lord of Shadows for me. Like the ending when Livy died, I felt my heart break. I cried, and well, I was reading this book and how other her family was dealing with her death. I cried too. Like it was so bad. I am not a crier. I don't cry normally with books. I've been crying more with books lately than I did when I was younger. But oh my god, when I read about the pain Ty was going through, Julian was going through, Drew and Tavi were going through. Poor Tavi, he was a baby. But I cried in the beginning. But like Ty handled the situation in just a fucked up way, and we'll talk about that. But Livy's death was horrifying to me, and seeing the aftermath of it was what I was scared of, which is why I decided to not read it. Robert dying, yeah, it was sad. Isabel lost their dad. Alex, Isabel, and Jace lost their dad, but Robert wasn't an amazing dad. Like Robert was a meh character. He was even he was even at a point I don't like you character, but he did become a better character when Max Lightwood Bane came along because he was a good grandpa, and that made me like him. But that doesn't excuse that still didn't make me feel as horribly for him as I did for Livy. Also, Livy was 15; he was 40. In the Shadow World, he'd lived a full life. Livy was just starting out. Okay, so talking about Livy dying, there was also the whole point about Ty trying to bring her back. What I the entire time he was doing that, I kept thinking, what about what happened with Annabelle? Like, did you not see how badly that went? Annabelle wasn't herself when she came back because when you die, you die. And bringing her back would have been a horrible idea. At the same time, I felt I was kind of rooting for a proper resurrection because I love the idea of a character being resurrected. In other books I've read, I have loved when they come back and they stay as normal. And I know that's kind of pointless because then why did they die in the first place? So it makes sense the way she was brought back. She was brought back as a ghost who was tied to Livy. She was brought back as a ghost that was tied to Ty because he was the one to bring her back, or and just like seeing him being hopeful and ignoring everything bad that was happening. Like when Julian and Emma were going into Fairy, I think it was then, but at one point when like everyone was scared about Julian dying, Kit uh Kit asks Ty, I believe, like how he's doing with all of that, and he says, "Oh, I'm not even worried about that. If he dies, if something happens to either of them, I'll bring them back. Like I'm gonna bring back Livy." Like he was in that kind of a mindset where he was in denial about his sister dying, and I think all of that stemmed from that denial. Like him wanting to bring her back altogether was because he was in denial about her dying in the first place. He didn't see her death as permanent because he had just witnessed Annabelle come back in a way, but he also didn't process the consequences of bringing her back. And we do get that at the end where he and Kit get into this fight while he's trying to resurrect her. Like their friendship breaks because of Ty's action. Like Kit tells him what he's doing isn't right. Though I think he should have said something before. Like, why would you say something the moment it's happening? And I would say the same thing about Ragnar. Like Ragnar should have like blocked it the moment it started happening. Yeah, he shouldn't have gone to Magnus because Magnus was sick, so that makes sense. But like he could have gone to Julian would have been useless. He could have gone to literally anyone and then they would have stopped him because you shouldn't be dealing with bringing back the dead. And it's just I feel like if Kit had acted before, it wouldn't have gotten to the point it did. But I also see a really good storyline forming with the new way Livy was brought back. And it's just going to be a really interesting thing to follow as Wicked Powers comes out. And even as like, so in the Ghost of the Shadow Market series, we also see one chapter with Livy, Ty, and Kit. So like seeing her as a ghost, she is still herself. In this book, she wasn't herself. So there is something going on there that would build a really good plot. So I guess it does make a point in this book to bring her back because it will give us a great story when the Wicked Powers comes out. Next, let's talk about the fucking cohort. The moment Livy and Robert died, oof, they took advantage of that situation so quick. Like, how can you monopolize at someone's death? Like, these people are grieving the death of their family, and you are using that as a momentum to build your personal vendetta. And they're so hateful and prejudiced. I hate their ideology. I hate how discriminatory they are. They're horrible to downworlders and anyone who even supports downworlders. That's why they hate the Blackthorns, because Blackthorns are accepting to downworlders. And just like, oh, the cohort makes my skin crawl. Like, the Shadowhunter series has had quite a few bad characters, and the cohort is just one of the worst. Like, because usually with the Shadowhunters, there's always been us versus them, like the Nephilims versus the enemy. Here, it is the Nephilim. Like, it is their clave that had become poisoned because of the cohort. And come to think of it, the cohort is so similar to the circle. I'm shocked anyone even still, like, chose to have them. Like, come on. The way they act, their ideologies, their behavior, their actions, they're all very circle-esque. And it does like end in the kind of in like the enclave war that happened with the circle. This time instead of circle people getting exiled, it was the clave itself that exiled itself to protect the children who were part of the cohort. That pissed me off even more. Like, you lost fair and square. Come to terms with it. Like, you call yourself warriors, any good warrior would come to terms with a proper loss. You wouldn't make excuses. You wouldn't blackmail people to get your way. You wouldn't threaten to kill yourself to get your way. And that pissed me off. And then there's Zara Dearborn. Like, she was horrible. I hated her so much. She took Cortana, and that was just horrible. Like, what the fuck? It's not yours to take. That belongs to the Carstairs family. And she even tells Emma, what did you ever do? You just got it because it's in your family. And I'm the better warrior, and blah, blah, blah. Bitch, Cortana chose Emma. And we get that amazing scene at the end during the war where Emma literally summons Cortana to herself. And it goes flying like Thor's hammer would, and that was fantastic. Speaking of Emma, a big part of her story arc in this book was the parabatai bond with Julian and her relationship with Julian. So right after Livy dies, she and Julian have a moment, and that causes Julian's parabatai rune to burn, and he realizes that he has to do something about it, and otherwise something bad will happen. And he doesn't want anything bad to happen while his family is mourning like that, obviously. So he goes to Magnus and he has his emotions shut off. And oh my god, I hated non-emotional Julian. Like, Julian is cunning and he is savage, as he is. But without emotions, he has the potential to be a villain. Like, he was somewhat of a villain without his emotions. He cold-heartedly killed someone without his emotions. And it's just I don't think I could have taken it if Julian never got his emotions back. Like when we were in Tool, I was so happy to have his emotions back because then he at least realized why he needed them, and even if it meant that the curse would come take place. Speaking of the curse, I okay, so how I looked at it was because they love each other, they become true Nephilim. And I don't think it's a curse per se if you think of it that way. Nephilims are basically children of angels, and when two shadow hunters who are Parvati love each other, their bond is strong enough to make them Nephilim. And yes, they don't have control, they have heavenly fire burning within them, and yeah, those things are like bad because the heavenly fire kills them, and if they don't have control they can kill other people, which we learned from the story we heard at the end, where we learn why there was a rule about Parvati not being able to be together. So it makes sense why they have that, but in an essence, because they love each other, they became angel. They became angelic. And I was really happy we had that moment at the end where Julian and Emma became angelic, because it did burn off their own. I was so happy that they were no longer Privati because they could be together finally. But I was also so scared they would die because, like, heavenly fire kills people. Like, Jace barely survived it and he has angel blood. So this whole situation was, oof. Although I am confused about how they managed to survive the heavenly fire, but it could be, my assumption is it's because they were Plurbitai, because they were bearing the load of the heavenly fire together, and yeah, that's my assumption. It was quite an interesting journey seeing them fight their feelings at the end, because throughout the book Julian was emotionless in their world, and then in Thule, the Parabatai bond didn't matter, so they didn't have to pretend to not love each other. And I think that was the best part of Thule, other than like having some of the characters who had died in this world be there. But I think that gave them an opportunity to explore what they had and just get that out, like, to know what they're feeling so they can make decisions. Like, that made Julian realize that he was in a cage without his emotions. That makes sense. Like, our emotions set us free in a lot of ways, and if he's not feeling anything, he's basically hidden behind a screen and he can't come out, and he has to see all his family go through things and he can't help them. Like that scene where Ty basically has the conversation with him where he tells Julian like he's gonna do something, but Julian, not feeling what he would normally feel, doesn't realize that that's something he should be paying attention to. That's something he should be aware of. That's something he should act on, which leads to Ty bringing back Livy. But like, emotions are key, and I'm glad he got his emotions back the moment like Magnus was okay. And I love that he's like, when they got back, he's like, I tried thinking of how to deal with things from your perspective. I thought, what would you do in this situation? So instead of going directly and asking Magnus to bring him his emotions back when they got back, because Magnus was dying, he decided to wait till Magnus was better to do that. Okay, so now let's talk about Thule. So Thule was interesting. I was so happy to see Livy alive there, and it feels like the two worlds were a puzzle piece. Everyone in this world who was alive was dead in that world. Like, all the Blackthorns except for Livy were dead. I mean, Emma and Julian were alive, but they were endarkened, so they don't really count. But that way, in the future, I could potentially see a crossover between the worlds again, since we know they can still do that, because Jace came there with Ash, and then Jace brought Ash back with him and went to the Seelie Queen here. Anyway, let's talk about Thule. I was so happy to see Olivia alive there, and she is so badass and amazing. I loved seeing that. And I also love that Thule allowed Julian and Emma to have a few moments where they could be themselves and not have to worry about being paired but tie. And that world, just think about how Mortal Instruments could have ended. Like, the Thule really brought to perspective how important the actions in the TMI series was to that universe. Like, if Clary hadn't been alive, the world would have ended up like that. If they had managed to, if Lilith had managed to kill Clary in our world, I keep calling it our world, it's in like their world, then Sebastian would have been alive and Jace would have always been trapped in that thing and he would have lost Clary. And we see how devastated, even emotionless he is when it comes to Clary. And then we also get to see Raphael, and it was just so cute when Emma and Julian tell him that Magnus Bane named his child after you, and he's like, how could he insult me like that? Tell Magnus Bane to change his child's name as they're leaving. And it was just really cute, and I love that. The tool was dark, and I hated it, but at the same time, the tool was useful because they learned about the consequences of the Parabatai curse. They heard about how the Parabatai became monsters, and also like that because they were in that world, they were able to learn about the mortal mirror being the cure to the illness going through the warlocks and the blight. So they worked as a team to get it all okay, and Magnus was okay, and let Malik and their little family can be happy. And finally, Julian could get his emotions back. Also, let's also talk about Ash for a second. Ash has this effect on people that like charms them and makes them love him and want to protect him. And it's potentially because of something that the Unseelie King did to him because of using the Black Book. And there's just so much shit that happened through that. Like, the Unseelie King was horrible. And when Kieran killed him, I was so happy. He imprisoned Jason Clary. And the reunion between the Shadowhunters was amazing. And then they were taken to the king by one of Kieran's brothers who was on their side. And then the king asked one of the guards to kill the brother because he betrayed him. And Kieran kills the king. And thank God the bitch is dead. I hated the king. And as they're trying to escape the Unseelie court, everyone else manages to escape, and Emma and Julian obviously end up in Tool going up, and which is where Annabelle and Ash are. And I was kind of glad that Julian finally got the chance to kill Annabelle and get revenge for his death. Get revenge for Livy's death. But I also kind of wish that they had managed to convince Ash to come back with them, because Ash really has the potential to be a good kid. Like, he is a child at the end of the day. So if with any child there is nature and nurture. With Sebastian, the reason he was who he was because he had crappy biology. Like, his father fucking experimented with demon blood with him, and then he also had a crappy upbringing. His father abused him, tortured him, and taught him horrible things. How did Sebastian ever have a chance of being a good person? I feel like if he was raised by Jocelyn, he would have been a good person, even with the demon blood. So with Ash, I think that if they had managed to convince Ash to go with them, he could have a better chance of being a good kid. I still think he has the potential. Like, he is with Jace of the Otherworld right now, and Jace of the Otherworld is screwed up, and he's cruel, and he was just under Sebastian's influence for so long. There's just no, I don't think he could ever go back to being the Jace from this world. And yeah, and I just don't want that influence to be on Ash. And the Seelie Queen is fucking awful, so she's not going to be a good influence on him either. I feel like a good solution would be for, during Wicked Power, somehow for Ash to come under Clary and RJ so he can have a loving experience, so he can be a good kid. He has potential. I see it. He has the potential to be a good person or a complete villain, and we'll just see how that works out. Okay, so moving on, let's talk about Clave in exile. We talked about how the cohort basically blackmailed the Clave when Alec became consul by threatening to kill themselves, and like, no good Shadowhunter would want the blood of other Shadowhunter children spilled. So Alec did what he could. He basically put the Clave, the actual Clave, in exile from Idris and locked the cohort in there. And I feel like, I was like, it's obviously not the best thing that happened, but I was also happy because this led to a Clave being formed that was less prejudiced. Like, it kind of weeded through all the bad seeds and put all the bad seeds in one box, hopefully. and the good people came out. I'm pretty sure there'll be spies amongst these people who are going to be reporting back to the bad people. But this also allowed like Alec to like get rid of the law that prevents Shadowhunters and Downworlders to get married in Shadowhunter gear. And finally Malik were able to have the wedding they wanted in Shadowhunter gold and Warlock blue, and it was just amazing. That chapter was one of my favorites in the book. It was so sweet. We had little Raphael and Max in it, and all the different characters and their storylines happening, and it was just adorable. And and then in the bonus chapter we get the Clay's engagement, which was even better. I love little Max. He oof. Like whenever I read the words Uncle Jason, that literally makes my heart swoon. It was so cute. I love these characters. Like the New York Institute is my favorite. Like I love those characters to death. And anytime any of them play a role in any of the other books, I love it so much. And speaking of the Clay's engagement, we also talk like Jace. In Jace's perspective, we learned that Clary told him about the visions she had and how she thought she was going to die and how she didn't want to leave him a widow. I just really wish that we got to see that scene. I wanted to see their conversation as she told him how that went. That happened in the Brosseland forest, while they were hiding from the cohort who thought they were dead and were coming to kill. Who thought they were dead, but like the Inquisitor knew they were alive and they were going to kill them. But anyway, but I just wanted to see that scene. I just want more Clay scenes, more Sizzy scenes, more Malik scenes. I'm down for all of that. But anyway, that was just that chapter, like the extra bonus chapter, was amazing. I loved all of the characters, and it was nice seeing them and have like finally Jace and Clary having that amazing moment between them. It was just like it was everything. And I definitely can't forget the Christina, Mark, and Kieran thing. I was so like it had been hinted in the first few books, but I was so happy when they finally came to terms with the fact the three of them loved each other and they wanted to be with each other. And I was really I was kind of scared that they wouldn't get to do it, because when Kieran became king, he mentioned that he couldn't have a human consort, and both of them are like Mark is part human and Christina is human. So I just was really scared about how that would end, but I was happy they were able to find a solution. Although it wasn't the best solution, I'm hoping that Kieran can somehow not be king, like someone else can be king. I'm hoping Adon, his brother, could be king. He said no, yeah. I know he said no, but like maybe in the future he changes his mind, or somehow he changes the rule about the consort thing, because their relationship is too precious for it to not be to be to be anything less than 100% real. And I know it's still real if it's in just one place, but it's still not. I want them to have everything that they can, because they are precious. And speaking of Diana, oh my god, she is a badass person. Like that scene with the Inquisitor where he was blackmailing her and threatening her by saying that he was gonna tell everyone she was trans, and how she cut off his fucking hand. That was amazing. And I just loved her, and I loved every scene with her in it, and I loved her and Gwen's relationship. Gwen was amazing too. Like, I love a supportive king. I love that she's found peace, and then she knows that it doesn't matter who knows, it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. She is who she is, and no one can take that away from her. And she is still a fucking shadow hunter. She's still wonderful, and she is still badass. Also, I just wanted to do a quick mention before I finish this video about Max, Raphael, and Tavi. Like, they're adorable. I love those babies in this book. Like, I know Tavi's like 7, which is older, but like, he seems younger, and the three of them are such great. Like, their friendship is wonderful, and I want to see more of that in the Wicked Powers. I want to see them being friends. I want to see more of Max and Raph. It'll be interesting seeing how the Clave plans on restructuring themselves, where they set up their headquarters, how they're doing the Shadowhunter Academy. I know they're doing it in New York, but like more details about that. And the Charlemagnes. I read the Ghost of the Shadow Market, but I wasn't exactly sure about where the Charlemagnes was located. So I just want to know more about that. I want the cohort's butt to be kicked in the next series. Like, I want them to no longer exist because people like that are horrible and I don't want anywhere near our precious characters. And I'm also really looking forward to Drew becoming more herself. Like, she stood up for herself a lot in this book. Like, she told people, like, you guys don't talk to me like I am in you. I'm a person. Like, you often overlook me. And I'm glad she's doing that. Like, she's speaking up for herself. And I also love the new relationship between Drew and Ty because they're finally, like, Ty is finally giving her the chance she deserves, and they're growing closer. And yeah, like Livy will always be his Livy, but Drew is also his sister, and I'm glad to see that relationship grow. I also hope that Ty and Kit repair their relationship because it did fracture because of Ty's action, and I hope that Ty is able to make up for it. Like and I hope he and Kit go back to being friends the way they were. And yeah, I just want to see more of these characters because they're all great, and I want to see more of the New York characters because I want more Clace and Malik and Sizzy. They were just the best. Anyway, so that's it for this really, really, really long book talk. I'll see you guys later. I'm gonna film a video about the Ghost of the Shadowhunter Market. A video about the Ghost of Shadow Market, and I loved it. I loved some of the stories, and some of them were like meh, but like the stories that were great in the book, which really made up for the mess. And I also am really looking forward to reading the Chain of Gold. Because I initially thought I wouldn't read it because it's not set in the modern world, and I don't really like reading about books from the past. I did read The Infernal Devices and I loved it, but it wasn't the same as reading something in the present day, and I wasn't sure if I was gonna read the previous one. The Last Hour. But after reading the Ghost of the Shadow Market, I'm definitely gonna be reading that because Anna Lightwood is just fucking amazing. Anyway, so that's it for this video, and I'll see you guys later.